Hey, everybody, welcome to this evening's episode of The Rope of Hope. Tonight I am joined by Dr. Kevin Payne, and he's going to be sharing his story and how he lives his life fully. But before we get into that, I just want to say if you are enjoying this podcast, if you're getting something out of it, if it's touching your soul, then please consider helping support what I do. Go over to buymeacoffee.com/, this fat girl life. Sign up as a follower. That is where you will find out all information regarding any of my podcasts, any of my projects. That's where I put it first. So there's a lot of stuff coming out. You definitely want to do that. But if you become a member, it's $5 a month. And with your membership, you are getting access to my guided journals at no charge. That is my gift to you to thank you for supporting me. You can't even get coffee at Starbucks for $5. So definitely consider buying me a coffee / this fat girl life. Dr. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for being with me today. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm delighted to be here with you, Kimberly.
Well, thank you. Before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'll make it easy as one, two, three. One, I'm egregiously overeducated. My doctorate's in sociology and psychology. I spent 15 years as a professor, 10 years as a tech entrepreneur, and I've spent the last 3 decades studying people, especially the question, why do some people succeed or fail under difficult circumstances? Number two, I live with MS. I was first symptomatic with multiple sclerosis in 1989. I was 20 years old. I was in college. I had some weird symptoms. It was subsequently misdiagnosed, and the symptoms came and went for a number of years. In 2002, I woke up one morning and couldn't feel my left leg below my knee. And I thought, that's weird.
Yeah.
But I'm still a young guy. I'm in my 30s at this point, and I'm still armored in my illusion of youthful invulnerability. So I just kind of shrugged it off, and a few days later, my leg was back, and then it was gone again, and then it was back, and then it was other parts of my body, and then finally one morning I woke up and I could feel my right arm and my head, but the rest of my body had completely disappeared. And at that point, my then wife said, I'm putting my foot down. You're going to get this looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And that instituted a new comedy of medical errors that resulted in a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And for those who don't know, MS is an uncurable autoimmune condition in which our immune systems attack the myelin, which is a fatty sheath that surrounds the neurons in our brain and spinal cord. And so, because everything we think, feel, do, say goes through some part of our brain and spinal cord, the symptoms to MS can be just about anything. And it depends on where the damage is. And so, for me, I'm chronic pain, chronic fatigue. I always have paresthesias and numbness. So, paresthesias are phantom feelings that aren't there. So, I always itch. I always have the feeling of like random electric shocks through my
Mm.
body. And then I have, especially whenever I get tired or I get overheated or too cold, temperature is often a trigger for MS. Then I have additional issues with my balance and vertigo, and sometimes my legs seize up on me. And then there are 30 other symptoms, no joke, that come and go. I once made an infographic out of all the symptoms that I live with. MS is a capricious beast.
Oh, my
So
word.
that's what I got. And number three, I am an enthusiastic flinger of myself from quote unquote perfectly good airplanes. Uh, Skydiving was a childhood dream that I started getting trained in as a young man in the 90s. And then I realized that I just did not have the time to finish that because I was working on my doctorate. And skydiving is not a hobby, it's a lifestyle choice. It requires a lot of time and effort. And so that fell by the wayside in favor of education and career and kids, and then eventually health. And eventually, because of my MS, I gave up on it. And when my life completely hit bottom, as I'll bet we talk about later, in 2019, I decided I was going to give myself one more chance at doing something for myself. And the thing that I chose was to go back to skydiving. So after a lot of challenges, I went back in 2019, and in 2020, I decided I'm going to become a serious skydiver, which meant passing 500 jumps and getting all the licenses and professional rating. And so I logged better than one jump a day in 2020, 370 jumps through the year while everybody else was holed up with COVID. I was screaming through the sky,
Oh my
and
God.
I crossed 500 and earned my coach rating as well. And that's kind of my way of saying I may have to accommodate my MS, but I'm still going to figure out creative ways to get what I want out of life in spite of it. So there
And
I am in a nutshell.
I love that. I love that. And I want to thank you for kind of explaining the medical portion as you went along because I was about to ask you to explain it. So you just took care of that all for me. So thank
Oh, you're quite welcome.
you. So let's go back to when you first started having the symptoms and
Hmm.
you first looked at this medically. And you said
Yeah.
there was a lot of misdiagnoses in that process.
Hmm. Yeah.
What were they diagnosing you with at that time?
so so you have to understand, I'm a young man. I'm in a demanding academic program. It was very stressful, and the symptoms I was presenting with at that time, I was suddenly fatigued. I was suddenly foggy in a way that I hadn't been. I had some balance issues. I had eye saccades, which is a common early symptom for MS, and that's where best way to think about it is your eyes stutter.
Hmm.
and and so and then I got really down about it. So I after a couple of months of that, I went to the university physician, and he listened to me, and I think he fixated on what he was expecting from a young man in a demanding program and from what he saw commonly, and he said, "Oh, you're depressed." Now, there's no doubt that I did have some symptoms of depression, but there were some other things that were going on as well. So he referred me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, "Yes, indeed, you are clinically depressed. This is major depression. Here are some drugs." And I was a young man at the time and didn't know enough to question any of this. And I said, "Okay." And the drugs didn't work. And so they said, "Here are some different drugs." And those drugs didn't work. And they said, "Here are some different drugs." And those drugs didn't work. And so they said, "You are treatment resistant," which is, of course, is the medical establishment's fancy schmancy way of saying, "We're throwing up our hands at you. You're on your own." So, so that was my first experience, and in a few months, the symptoms went away, and I felt normal again. And of course, with especially the early stages of relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, that's very common. And so I went about my life. In a couple of years, I had a flare up of symptoms again. And I just thought, well, there's my weird depression again. And then a few months later, they were gone. I was back to normal, and then it happened again. And then finally, I started getting the different symptoms, the numbness, the not being able to feel my legs. And it was only when the new symptoms came along that didn't fit the old understanding that they had given me that I went back for additional medical examination.
So you mentioned flare ups. Now,
Hmm.
are flare ups a common thing? Like you go through, you're just normal, flare up.
Yeah, pretty much. And they can be they come in a couple of different flavors. Okay, so a true exacerbation with MS will have new symptoms, and that's emblematic of new damage going on in your system. But we also have those pseudo flares, okay, and that's where your existing symptoms wax and wane in their seriousness. So for
Okay.
me, as I'd indicated earlier, I'm at the point in my condition now where there's 7 or 8 symptoms at least that I always have. And they can come from the level of annoying to debilitating. And then there are also those other, additional 25, 30 symptoms that sometimes are completely gone. I don't experiencing them at all, but then they can suddenly flare up. And it's usually with MS when we're really tired and we're overtaxed, then that gets worse. So, for example, I can generally move around the world fairly well most of the time, but then it gets to the end of the day and my balance can get really sketchy and I may have to hold on to things to move around. I may go ahead and use a cane, those sorts of things. Uh, Same thing with temperature sensitivity. Like many with MS, I have heat sensitivity. And so when I get overheated, then my symptoms get worse. And for me, what that looks like is the numbness that I always feel below my knees gets worse and starts traveling up my body, and more of my body will disappear. Now, a few years ago, I also started getting, about 5 years ago now, I started getting cold sensitivity, which I didn't previously have. And so now, if I get too cold, it affects me differently. My legs will actually just seize up and I'll topple over. They won't be able to move. So, so I have to be very mindful of, the atmospheric conditions because it can have a serious impact on my ability to get around in the world. And again, this is really common with MS because it's one of those things where I have vacillated back and forth about getting, say, a disabled parking permit.
Hmm.
I don't currently use one. I can get one. I can get the letter from my neurologist anytime I want to get it. But for me, it would probably cause a lot of additional problems with well-meaning twits in the world who try to get into our grill about stuff. Because the chances are I would be walking completely fine going into an event. When I would need it is after the event was over and I was really tired and I wasn't able to walk well coming out. So, up to this point, I haven't done that, but it's always in the back of my mind. Do I do that? And it's strange to explain to people because I present as a reasonably youthful middle-aged guy who can get around pretty well, but sometimes, as I said, my legs don't work, so I have to sit. And so sometimes I get weird looks from people. They're like, "Why aren't you letting those obviously more elderly people sit?" or something like that. And I want to say, well, I have no choice. My legs literally are not working at this moment,
Right.
and I physically can't stand. And and trust me, I would if I could because I don't want your sanctimonious passive aggressive glances in my direction.
So I'm gonna ask a question, and I'm hoping this isn't weird. What does it feel like to not feel your legs like that? to just have them go completely numb. Because I deal with nerve damage in my legs, so I deal with
Mhm.
some numbness,
Mhm.
but like I can know that I'm touching it or something. I can feel something. It's
Right.
not that there's completely numb and I can't feel anything.
Right.
So what does that feel like?
Well, it feels like nothing. But I mean, seriously, for me, it's a gradated scale. So sometimes I have, like right now, I've got maybe 20% feeling in my lower extremities. And what it really feels like is like the tactile equivalent of an old-fashioned TV from when we were kids and the rabbit ears were out of alignment. And
Okay.
you're squinting, trying to see the picture through all the snow. Well, that's kind of what it is. And then it's like that snow gets, there's suddenly there's less signal and more noise and more noise and more noise until it's just completely white noise. And and I'll give you an example of how weird it is. It's because many years ago, when my kids were still little, and it had been not too long after my diagnosis, maybe 2 or 3 years after being diagnosed, and it was summertime, and I was walking around barefoot, and I came in from outside on the deck and walked through the kitchen to go back to the bedroom to pick something up and go back outside. So I walked through the kitchen, and what I didn't know at the time was that my big galoot of a dog had tried to help my kids putting some dishes away, and in the confusing snarl of things, a glass, actually one of these glasses in this set right here, had broken, and they thought they had picked everything up, but they hadn't. And there was one shard of glass, and I stepped on
Mm.
it walking through the room, and I embedded a 2-inch shard of glass completely in the sole of my left foot and didn't feel it. And so I walk down the hall, and I get down to the end of the hall, and I'm about to go through the doorway, and my children are screaming from the other end of the hall, "Dad, Dad, there's blood everywhere." And I look around, and they're just standing there, just like wild eyed at the end of the hall, and they're pointing down at the ground. They say, "Look." And there was a bloody left footprint all the way down the hall. So I leaned into the door frame and picked up my foot, and sure enough, there's blood spurting from the bottom of my foot. And I grabbed my foot and sliced my hand open and pulled out this shard of glass, and I didn't even feel it.
Oh
So
my
that was
god.
the last time I've gone barefoot. I just don't do it anymore
Well, yeah.
because that I would have bled out and not even noticed it.
Oh my word.
And this, of course, I mean, the leg challenges. This was the big thing for me to overcome learning to skydive because you have to be body aware when you're skydiving. And if your legs are out of balance in free fall, you start spinning around and tumbling, and it gets really crazy looking really fast. Yeah, have you seen the movie Captain Marvel
No.
where she comes? Well, there's a scene from the end where she comes back in to Earth. She's been like flung back into Earth, and they had a stunt woman do it, and she's just like flailing around in midair, and she goes like thousands of feet, just flailing and tumbling through the air. Well, that was me for some jumps until I figured out how to understand what was going on with my lower legs because I can't feel them. It took me a lot of extra jumps to do this. Normally, it takes 25 jumps to get your A license, your first license in skydiving. It took me 47, and I had to do a lot of extra work on the ground, and I had to spend some time in the vertical wind tunnels, with an instructor right there on my leg saying this is exactly where it needs to be. And what I did was I learned even though I couldn't feel my legs below my knees, I could reliably feel what was going on with the tendons behind my knees. So I learned to understand what my lower leg was doing and what my foot was doing by the tension that I felt behind my knees. Just like landing doing a stand-up landing on a parachute when you can't feel your feet, I had to learn to feel the pressure at my knees. So I know I'm down when I feel the pressure at my knee.
Now, you mentioned earlier hitting that moment.
Hmm.
Can you go into more detail on that?
Sure, sure. So it becomes a really long, complex, layered story. So I'll try to give the high points here. But for the first few years after I was diagnosed with MS, I was handling it pretty well. And during that time, I was a professor, and I was administering a large academic department where I had 150 instructors and like 10,000 student enrollments in my program. And I came to the point where I kind of felt like I'd done everything I wanted to do in the academy, and I wanted to go out and become a tech entrepreneur because I had a technology that I developed from my years of research that I wanted to get out into the market. But I couldn't because at that point in the United States, we still didn't have a public health care option. And so I was handcuffed to a job because that's the only way I can get insured. Because no insurance company in the world is going to touch me by myself. Because MS is one of the most expensive conditions you can possibly
Mm-hmm.
have. So not only so so I'm hanging in there on a job that I'm already in my mind kind of done with because I'd done the professor thing for 15 years and I was ready to go on and have a new challenge. And at that time, my then wife was also going through a lot of mystery medical symptoms. And it was originally diagnosed as migraine. And they tried treating that and nothing worked. And then her blood pressure started going wonky. And then she started having hallucinations and aphasia and all kinds of weird incidents. And finally, her blood pressure almost killed her. And one thing led to another. They did some more tests, and we end up at the university hospital 2 days before Christmas that year in front of an oncologist. And he walks into that meeting and, without even a hi, howdy do, opened with, "It's a pretty bad cancer. And if it weren't for the holidays, I would admit you immediately and we would remove your kidney this afternoon.
Oh
As
my
it
God.
is, yeah, as it is, direct quote here, I will give you the weekend to have Christmas with your children and put your affairs in order. And on Monday morning, you will be here and we will remove your right kidney." So we did. And the biopsy afterwards determined that her right kidney was 9.3 centimeters. The tumor was 8.8.
Holy crap.
It had been in her system for 14 years, and it was a very, very late stage 3 hormone secreting chromophobe renal cell carcinoma. They said that if they hadn't taken it then, she wouldn't have made it to Valentine's Day. And so I had been through these years not only living with my own symptoms of MS, but with these increasingly dire symptoms, trying to be a caregiver for her because she couldn't work. So I was a single support for a family of 4 with our 2 young kids. And my system is going haywire, and I'm trying to keep handle on that. But then she got, then they, literally said, "You're cured and you'll be fine in 6 months." Well, it took her well over a year before she was close to back to her normal. And once she got there, my MS was also in a pretty good place at that point, and the Obama administration had passed the ACA. And so it was now feasible for me to go out and become a tech entrepreneur. So I left the safest job in the world as a tenure track academic to become, the riskiest thing in the world as a tech entrepreneur, because you know how well those work out. And it was probably, it seemed like my system had just been holding it together under so much distress for so long that finally it just was overwhelmed and gave up. And so now I'm out on my own, and I've got a team, but it's all about getting my technology out into the world. So my brain has to be working for this thing to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a new exacerbation with a new set of symptoms that I'd never had before, and it turned out it was a massive right frontal temporal exacerbation. And so what that means is higher cognition, abstract thinking, processing social signals, emotional regulation. The list of symptoms looks like the list from dementia.
Mm.
And so we're out there, me with my family, without a net, and my brain explodes. And so things continued to get pretty dark. So, because we've had a lot of things in a row here,
Yeah.
but then it gets worse, and I'm not able to get better for a long time, and I get really depressed because I'm a brain guy. This is what I do. If my
Well,
brain doesn't
yeah.
work, I can't do what I do. And so I got really depressed. My my then wife and kids uh, gave up hope in me and decided that this wasn't a journey they could continue. They were overwhelmed, so they left, and I was alone. And 3 weeks after my son left, who was the last one to leave, my beloved dog died traumatically in front of me. And
Oh my
uh,
God.
yeah, yeah. And 3 days after that, I was almost struck by lightning. I wasn't directly struck; it struck the tree, yeah, right nearby me. But it blinded me and deafened me and knocked me off my feet. And so I pretty much thought I was living the Book of Job, and I gave up. I really did. I could no longer see a path from the life that I was living to any kind of life that I was interested in living. And I knew that was a really dangerous place to be. So I decided I was going to give myself one more chance. One more chance. And I knew that I had been so decimated by this illness and all the fallout from it because nobody teaches us how to live with a condition that is never going to get better. And
Mm-hmm.
and I had all the book learning in the world about people, got a PhD in people, been studying for years, but that's not the same as the lived experience. And so I knew I was going to have to rebuild myself from the ground up. And that meant that I was going to have to develop a new humility. And I was going to have to embrace a beginner's mindset. And I was going to have to extend myself grace and kindness in a way that I had not. And and I also knew that I needed I needed to reclaim something that I felt like I'd lost. And I needed a win. I needed something that was going to demand that I grow. And for me, that was skydiving. So in 2019, I went back to skydiving, and it was a big challenge for me with the leg issues, especially. And I have skydivers are very close with one another. It's the kind of closeness that you see among military personnel or first responders, people who face death regularly in their activities. And death is a, a constant presence in the sport, even though it is remarkably safe. It is, and actually, we just got out of 2021. That is the safest year in the history of skydiving. There were like 3.5 million jumps in 21 in the United States and only 10 fatalities. So just remarkably safe. But we all understand that it is unforgiving of stupidity and hubris, and gravity always wins. So we are pretty close to each other. And skydivers call each other Sky Family, and they really banded together and helped me figure out how to be a safe, successful skydiver.
So, how did it feel when you had that first successful jump after everything that you had gone
Well, I wasn't going to let myself get real excited about it that quick, that easily, but it was a good feeling. It was a good feeling. I thought, okay, now I just need to string a bunch of these together, and it's a first step on a path that I didn't know whether I was capable of traveling any longer. And so I wasn't going to get myself get too excited about it, but it was definitely a glimmer of hope, and that was what I really needed at that time.
through? It gave you the win.
Hmm. Yeah, and it was truly frustrating because I had 13 jumps before I came back, so that's not a lot of jumps, but it was enough that I'd been through most of the training, and I had an expectation for what this was going to be like, and yet you would think that someone with that kind of background coming back to it, it would be easy for them to progress through the training pretty quickly, and yet it took me 47 jumps to get that A license. So that was kind of frustrating because here you got, younger people half my age without MS who are zipping through in 25 jumps, no problem. And I'm struggling along and having to redo lots of jumps. But as I said, I knew this was going to be a challenge, and I knew that this was going to be good for me because it was forcing me to accept myself as I am at this moment, strengths and weaknesses and limitations and everything in an honest manner. Because, as I said, you cannot safely overestimate your skills in a skydive. That will get you killed. So you've got to be very honest about how you assess what you can do. And that was frustrating for me, and kind of embarrassing in some ways, because yeah, it took me almost twice as many jumps to do it. But on the other hand, it's all right. I'm still making progress. I'm loving what I'm doing. I'm regrowing some badly debilitated confidence that I need. And I mean, really, when you think about it, so fear is on the inside of an airplane. And I mean, that's when your anxiety is there with you, and then somebody, when you're a newbie, and one of the jumpers flings that door open, and somebody will shout door, and the wind will whoosh through the cabin, and it'll get really loud, and your eye is going to get really big, and that's kind of terrifying because now you have a hole right there, and there's, and it's 3 miles away from anything else. and and but but the cool thing is, once you pass through that door, you pass through the fear into this most amazing joy. And skydiving makes you feel, on the one hand, really small and alone, and humble in the face of a magnificently large world. But it also makes you feel large and connected to everything. And there you are, flying through space, and you see the entire world, horizon to horizon, all around you. And the structures of humanity are like children's toys on the ground. And it is the most amazing shift in perspective. And it is, in the Stoic sense of the word, a memento mori. The Stoics, the Roman philosophers, would said, contemplate death, because if we remember that we will all die, that encourages us to seize each precious moment of life that we have in front of us. So every time I jump out of an airplane, a little voice in the back of my head says 82 seconds. Because from 14,000 feet, when I exit, my life expectancy is now 82 seconds. If I do nothing in 82 seconds, I will impact the earth, and the earth will win. And so it is the most mindful, focused, joyful experience I can imagine. And then every skydive gets to this point. And this is why I had this picture for the cover of my book. And it took us 8 jumps over 6 weeks to get that exact image, because that is what I saw in my head. And I wanted this because it tells the story of what I do with Your Life Lived Well. When that picture was taken, I was at 5,000 feet. 5,000 feet. And at 5,000 feet, my life expectancy is now 27 seconds. Less than a TV commercial. But what am I doing? I've got my hands up to my head like this, and I'm about to sweep them out in a broad gesture. And in skydiving, that's what gesture we all know. It's the first one we learn. It's called the wave off. And what I am doing in that instant is I am warning everyone in my airspace that I am about to take positive action to save myself, because I wave off and I deploy my parachute. And on the one hand, I think self-help, there's a lot of garbage out there under the self-help rubric, and that really bothers me. But on the other hand, self-help is all we have when the system fails us. And the system has failed us. There is no cure for what we have. And so I want everybody to understand, with what I'm doing, yeah, you don't have to go jump out of an airplane. But you know, that's not what this is about. What this is about is, with a chronic illness, you can feel like your life is in free fall. You can feel like you are at the mercy of forces that are so much bigger and out of control. And you can feel like it's just a few seconds from the end for you. And we can live out there on that edge and never get the opportunity to to pull ourselves back to our home, to that safe place where we can truly rest and recover and relax and consolidate and grow, because we all want to go out to our edges, whatever our edges are, because that's what triggers growth. And that's where so many of these positive life experiences that we all treasure happen. But we can't live being forced to be out there on the edge all the time. And so what I want to, what I want people to understand when they engage with what I'm doing with Your Life Lived Well is that you are now making an active choice to save yourself. And it's going to look different for everybody. I'm not about pushing a particular method. There's no secret, there's no path, there's none of that. That is morally disingenuous. But what I can tell you is that from decades and decades and decades of social behavioral scientific research, what I can do is I can say, out of all of these possibilities, there are hundreds of different things you can try, and all of them will work for someone, and only some of them will work for you. What I can do is I can help give you the tools so that you can understand yourself and your circumstances and your condition better, so that you can learn to make and implement better decisions for yourself. And that's the only thing that I'm interested in. Because I'm not going to stand up here and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to say, there's 26 different things you can do here. And if you are this kind of person or this kind of person or this kind of person, this is the one you should probably try first. And if that doesn't work, here's the next thing to try. And you have to understand that what works for you now is not going to work for you in 6 months or 6 years, because you're going to change, your condition's going to change, your goals are going to change, your environment's going to change. But
Hopefully.
yeah, yeah. But you can learn how to better read yourself and your needs and make those better choices. Because we've all been in that frustrating position where you're experiencing some kind of symptom, and then it's like, oh, your cousin's hairdresser's sister said, try this. And, and it just goes on and on and on. And that can get so frustrating so quickly, because you may try some of them and chances are they're not going to work. Why? Because they'll work for somebody, but probably not for you. So we got to have a better way, and that begins with better knowledge, and that begins with doing what I had to do, not jumping out of planes, becoming kinder to myself, and understanding that this is a long, slow, difficult process to build a better life in the face of something that's really awful that you have to carry along with it. And it's okay to accept that. This is not about fluffy, smarmy, positive thinking. That it's not about toxic positivity. It's about saying, I can find a better way. And it's not going to be easy, but I can still find it.
I normally would end the show by asking you for an inspiring message. But I think you just said it, of being kinder to yourself.
Yeah.
And so That's how I'm going to end today's episode. I am going to encourage every person watching, listening, reading, however this is coming to you, to be kinder to yourself, be more forgiving, be more accepting, and show yourself some grace. Because we don't always get that from the outside world. It has to start
Yeah,
internally.
it does. And look at it this way. Think about how you treat yourself, and then ask yourself, if somebody else treated you like that, would you still have a relationship with them?
I use
Probably
that
not.
a lot.
Yeah, probably not. And yet, you are smushed into that carcass with yourself. You can't get away. It's no wonder you are distressed and angry and frustrated and feel hopeless. It's because you got to live with that jackweasel. So be kinder to yourself. Be kinder to your future self, because your future self is the one who has to live with the consequences of the decisions you're making today.
100%. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on this evening, for being so open, and for sharing so much. Not only has this episode been inspiring, but it's also been very educational, which I really appreciate because I've learned a lot about MS that I didn't necessarily even know. And so that makes it easier for me to help others because I do know a couple people in my direct circle that, deal with MS. And so having this knowledge is beneficial in that aspect. So I want to thank you for that. You guys, I will be back next week. I am going to go ahead and cut this off tonight because, as we can hear, the voice is going. So I am going to end tonight's episode, but I want to thank everybody for being here. Kevin, I want to thank you again for being with me tonight. I have so enjoyed getting to speak with you. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Kimberly. Be well.
You too.